welcome all to this Profound Personal Awareness webinar today. Just as we start, I'd like to invite you to consider this more of an online workshop as opposed to a webinar. I'm going to have an opportunity to guide you through some experiences and some exercises that I hope will touch you personally in some way. There's a couple of things that I have learned as a leadership coach and facilitator and as a leader myself through the course of my career. First and foremost is that I've learned that this thing called leadership is not strictly a structured intellectual activity. And in many ways, it's much more of an emotional activity. Secondly, I really learned that we as leaders are measured by only one thing. Every one of us on the call here today as a leader is measured by only one thing. Are other people performing at a higher level in some way because of us? Are people more engaged, more committed, more aligned, more innovative, more productive? Are we creating more leaders? The outcome of great leadership really is in the performance of others. And if you look at this idea of others, there is always an emotional aspect of that. We cannot deny it. Quite frankly, unless we deal with the emotional aspect of leadership, organizations, and people, it will deal with us. The big question for us, I believe, as leaders is how can we harness the power of our emotions? And this really is the question that is fundamental to this entire series of webinars. Today, we're really looking at the brain. We're looking at this idea of emotional intelligence. And the idea, okay, what is emotional intelligence? There's a number of great authors, Daniel Goleman, others who have written extensively on this. In summary, if you look at this idea of emotional intelligence, it really is the awareness of and the developing of our whole brain. It's really about looking at connecting the emotional side and the rational side of our brains. And for the leader, really seizing that power. Antonio Damasio is one of the groundbreaking neuroscientists who did great research on this. This quote from him is my favorite. Reason without emotion is neurologically impossible. Essentially, what he discovered was that when parts of the brain that generate emotion are damaged in some way, we can still function in some ways. We can talk, we can analyze, we can think. The problem is we can no longer act. We can no longer make decisions. We can no longer relate to people. Something inside us is severed. And what it is the connection between our emotional selves and our more rational selves. When there's not good dialogue, good communication between those two sides, we become, quite frankly, less than a full human. So what does this mean for us as leaders? What is this thing that we refer to as leadership emotional intelligence? One of the great misunderstandings about leadership emotional intelligence is that it is really simply about being nice. It's about being Pollyanna-like in the organization. And quite frankly, nothing could be further from the truth. Emotionally intelligent leaders have a very noticeable and distinctive power about them. They have the capacity, quite frankly, to constructively confront others. They can lead change. They're empathetic. They're compassionate. They have a sense of resilience. They can inspire the organization. The idea of leadership emotional intelligence is not about being soft. The idea of leadership emotional intelligence is about harnessing your internal power. It's about building that leader within. Emotionally powerful leaders, and look around your organization for individuals that you would consider to be emotionally powerful. These are leaders that really understand and experience their full range of emotions. They're not devoid of emotion. They recognize that they have emotions. They feel their emotions. They see them as important sources of information, and they use these emotions to power their leadership. For leaders, we believe there's 4 dimensions of leadership emotional intelligence. And I'll talk about it in just a moment, but those of you who have completed the LEQ, the Leadership Emotional Intelligence Assessment, will have some feedback on these 4 dimensions. The first one is personal awareness. It's about really understanding who you are. Secondly, about self-mastery. It's about, after you understand who you are and what your natural emotions and emotional patterns are, it's about becoming the master of your own ship. And thirdly, and this is the one that moves more into the domain of the leader, it's about using your understanding of yourself, your emotions, and those of others to make profound leadership connections with others. And fourthly, on a broader team and organizational perspective, it's about having the capacity, the ability to influence in a positive way others within your team and your organization. So today we're going to drill down and focus on this idea of personal awareness. First of all, wouldn't it be nice to know what your LEQ is, if you can measure it quantitatively in some way and qualitatively? As many of you are aware, at our last webinar, we offered you the opportunity to take what we call the LEQ, Leadership Emotional Intelligence Assessment. And many of you have. And for those of you who have, I'm going to just take you through a few slides here to explain the report that you have received. The Leadership Emotional Intelligence is a very unique assessment. It looks at only one thing. It looks at leadership practices and behavior and feedback associated with how you show up to other people on an emotional intelligence basis. It's a classic multi-rater 360 assessment. It's anonymous and confidential. There are 40 behaviors in the assessment, 10 of them associated with being personally aware, how aware you are of yourself, 10 of them associated with mastery and self-mastery, 10 of them associated with making connections, and 10 of them associated with influencing the organization. There's a number of averages and details and charts in the report, as well as some comments from others, a comparison with others, and an opportunity for you to chart out and record some next steps that you would take. The assessment has a report summary. It starts out with a report summary. It gives you on each of the 4 dimensions how you have scored, how other people have scored you, how you scored yourself, and how others have scored you. There's a ranking of all 40 behaviors. This ranking tells you how other people have observed you, how frequently they've observed you. So the ones at the top are the ones that people see you doing most frequently. The ones at the bottom are the ones that people see you doing the least frequent. There's also all the individual leadership behaviors are rated. You can see how individuals have ranked you on every one of these behaviors. Many people go right to the commentary from observers. They find this very valuable through the course of the assessment. There are 3 or 4 questions in which people provide you direct commentary about how you have influenced them and also how you might use your natural talents as a leader to increase your impact. This chart is a chart that many people find valuable when they're looking to see how they rate compared to other leaders. So this chart here tells you how you rank in comparison to every other leader who's taken this assessment. So if you are at the 50th percentile, half of the people who have taken this assessment have scored higher, and half the people have scored lower than you. At the back of the assessment, there is places there for you to look at and make note of the gaps in your own perception, themes, patterns, inconsistencies, and also to identify some specific areas of strength and development opportunities that you may pursue over the next year or so. My hope is that each of you who has taken that assessment and has received a copy of your report will use it and will refer back to it as you look to develop both your leadership competencies and your leadership emotional intelligence. So if we look at this idea of leadership emotional intelligence, how do we increase it? It naturally increases. When you think about it, as we work in organizations, as we connect more with people, as we receive more feedback about ourselves, we develop emotional intelligence that is useful for us within the organization. It develops naturally. The however is this: we know that it is accelerated through intense experiences, our own discipline, and our ability to be self-honest, to really look at ourselves. So what all 3 of these tells us is that we can accelerate our development on this scale. So today we're going to look at the idea of personal awareness, and those of you who are interested in the idea of leadership and leadership development, I would really encourage you to think about the idea of personal awareness as the foundation for all leadership development. We at Bluepoint have outstanding leader as coach programs, leadership communication programs, foundational leadership programs, high potential programs. And what we found is that if the participants in the program have a thirst for emotional intelligence, have a desire to grow with emotional intelligence, have a threshold level of emotional intelligence. They are far more able to excel in the other programs. Essentially, any type of leadership development has as its foundation personal awareness, knowing oneself. Today we're going to look at 3 elements. Number 1, we're going to look at this idea of emotions. And it's my hope that you're able to, through the course of this conversation, identify patterns of emotional intelligence, of emotions that are absolutely unique to yourself. Then we're going to look at this idea of traits and characteristics. What is unique about you? What is different about you? What is special about you? And then we're going to look at this idea of triggers. For you personally, what triggers certain actions, reactions? What emotional triggers that come primarily from others, sometimes circumstances, but mostly from others, will set off particular patterns of action and thinking and feeling that really impact your leadership? So my intention today is to guide you through these 3 elements and give you an experience in each one of them that hopefully will help advance your personal awareness on each one of these 3 scales. I love this quote from Richard Feynman. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. I share this with you because it's my experience both in a lot of the clients that I work with, groups that I speak with, and as well as my own journey, is that we often are less than fully honest with ourselves. And it's easy to fool ourselves. And those who really walk down the road of personal awareness, of enhancing personal awareness, often need to recognize this and to make a commitment to be brutally honest with oneself as you pursue this journey. Leadership development at its core is not about learning the 5 nifty steps to leadership success. There's not 4 or 7 practices that can be used in every organization and every team. There's lots that we can learn from the researchers who identify leadership competencies and practices. But if you look at the great leaders, the leaders who really make a positive impact on the organization, they simply have worked on themselves. They have become the very best versions of who they are. They have not tried to become some weird combination of Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, and Gandhi. What they've done is they have said, I am a unique person who has the potential of unique personal power, and I'm going to develop the very best version of myself. To develop the very best version of oneself, one needs to know, really, who they are. So, who are you, really? I'd like to take you on what we call the journey within. Before we do that, I'd just like to share quickly a story with you. This is a Zen story. It's a story called the Monk in the Mirror. There once was a monk who would carry a mirror with him wherever he went. A priest noticed this one day and thought to himself, this monk must be so preoccupied with the way he looks that he has to carry a mirror all the time. He should not worry about the way he looks on the outside. It's what's on the inside that counts. So the priest went up to the monk and asked, why do you always carry that mirror? Thinking for sure that this would prove his guilt. The monk pulled the mirror from his bag and pointed it at the priest. Then he said, I use it in times of trouble. I look into it, and it shows me the source of my problems as well as the solution to my problems. The theme of this story, obviously, is that we have within us the ability to manage and solve our own problems. And most of the things, the challenges that we have as leaders, as members of an organization, come from within. Now, this journey within, we call it the journey within. It's my hope to be your guide over the next 30 or 40 minutes. And as you look at this journey, it starts with one large misconception that many of us have. There is no place to arrive at. There's no place where I know myself completely. It is a journey with no destination. It's a journey that really is about getting up every morning and deciding to learn about oneself as opposed to ever getting there. Great leaders never get to some place where they know themselves so well that there's nothing else to learn. It's really much more about a willingness to be open, to have an appetite for self-knowledge. Now, this journey often starts with analysis and research. My guess is most of you have been on some kind of a program, Myers-Briggs, FIRO-B, where you've done some kind of analysis into your personality. Now, these are all very helpful, and they do give you some perspective on who you are and what's unique and what's special about you, what's your personality like, and it is an analysis-based approach. I'm an ENTJ. If you look at this, the danger with this is me saying I'm an ENTJ, and now I am personally aware. I know who I am. Those 4 letters describe me in some way. Now, quite frankly, those 4 letters are very informative. Those 4 letters tell me a lot about who I am and how I interact with other people and how I interact with the world. But it is only veneer thin. It's very much more about my willingness to continue down that road, to have the courage and commitment to keep going. If you take a look at the image on your screen, you'll see a long, straight highway. Towards the end of that highway are mountains. The road tends to get bumpier. The deeper and farther you go in this journey of self-discovery tends to be tougher and tougher. It also tends to be increasingly rewarding along the way. I would encourage you, however, to carry that mirror with you, to travel with that mirror. That's a metaphor for to always be looking within. So today, 3 sections I'd just like to remind you we're going to be covering: emotions, traits and characteristics, and triggers. Think about these: emotions, traits and characteristics, and triggers. What if you knew, really knew, your unique emotional patterns? What if you really knew what you were like, how other people perceive you, your traits and characteristics? What if you really knew what motivated you to do certain things, caused you to function maybe not at your very best? It's my hope that as we go through the exercises in each one of these elements today, that you are able to enhance your self-knowledge in each one of these dimensions. First one is this idea of emotions. Regardless of what we say about the word emotions, there's still a connotation to it that it is soft, that it is negative, and that it is unbusinesslike, and it takes away from our power. We even use terms like "don't get emotional." This is not an emotional issue. You're getting too emotional. We use this language because it's language that's embedded in us, in our society, because we think at a very core that emotion equals weakness. If you think at the idea of emotions also, another misunderstanding is that most of us think it's bipolar. You know, we go through, we're either happy or sad, and that these are spikes of good and bad through the course of a day, that we are generally steady in terms of our emotional orientation. Then sometimes we get happy, and then sometimes we get sad. Really, nothing could be further from the truth. The researchers in this area tell us that we are under the spell of emotions 100% of the time. 100% of the time. There's some emotional things happening because of the nature of the way that our brains are hardwired. Here's the problem, is even when we sit here today, one might think that you're having an unemotional experience in this webinar. I love this quote: "A fish is the last to discover water." A fish is the last to discover water. It's my belief that we are under the power and influence of emotions 100% of the time, and they're much, much more significant than we give them credit for. Here's a way of thinking about it, and from a leadership perspective. When you are at your best as a leader, what emotion are you experiencing? When you're at your best as a leader, what emotion are you experiencing? Now, leaders that I work with describe they're at their best when they're really in the flow, when they're really feeling challenged but also confident, when they're feeling joyful, when they're feeling grateful. Leaders are at their best when they have feelings that they attribute positive attributes to. Now think about this. If you're not at your best emotionally, are you not drawn? Is not energy drawn from you? Are you not functioning as a substandard leader? So if we think about this idea of leadership and emotion, we would want to, would we not, have the most positive set of emotions on which to base our leadership. I have a quiz for you. Think about the course of the day, and I'm going to give you 4 oversimplified emotions. And what I'd ask you to do is, what percentage of your day are you most influenced, under the influence of this particular emotion? So in the course of a day, this is the course of a work day, what percentage of the time would you consider yourself to be happy? Sad. How much of the day would you consider yourself to be sad? And what proportion of the day would you consider yourself to be glad? Consider that to be grateful. Think about the difference between happy and sad. Happy is joyful, glad is more being grateful. Mad, angry. What percentage of the day? Now, as you think of these, as a leader, how effective are you when you're happy? How effective are you when you're sad? How effective are you when you're glad? How effective are you when you're mad? When I have looked at this for myself personally, and I look at these, of course it's an oversimplification. There are literally dozens of emotions. I've only put 4 up here today. For the sake of this assessment, I would select glad. And I have also experienced other leaders who would share this with me. When I feel particularly grateful for what I have, grateful for the organization I lead, grateful for the opportunities to serve that I have, grateful for the colleagues that I work with, grateful for my clients, I'm at my very best as a leader. My very best as a leader. And because I feel energized, I feel charged, I feel like I'm on a particular mission. Anger absolutely debilitates me. If I am angry, it's very difficult for me to excel as a leader. What happens is I put so much energy into that anger. Now, for some positive anger motivates leaders. It motivates leaders to change things, to get things done, to right wrongs. But for me, this idea of gratefulness and being glad is what motivates me as a leader. That's when I'm at my best. So let's shift to this idea of traits and characteristics. I use the words traits and characteristics to really describe the multitude of things that really make you special in some way. So think about it. Personality. You have a unique personality. You have other traits in which how people experience you. You have unique fears, needs, values, beliefs, passions. So when you think about it, if the nature of the human condition is very multifaceted, how much do you really know about yourself? Now, I'd mentioned earlier the Myers-Briggs Type Inventory, the MBTI, a good instrument to help you learn more about yourself. There are many other such assessments. None of these assessments or instruments or sources of feedback are valuable to you unless you are truly open to what they tell you. One of my favorite Erich Fromm quotes. Erich Fromm is a noted psychologist, psychiatrist, who really looked at this idea of personality not as a static thing, but as something that is developable. Man's main task in life is to give birth to himself, to become what he potentially is. The most important product of his effort is his own personality. So if you see what Fromm is saying here, he's saying it's not just that we're born with a personality. That personality is our #1 product, developing it, learning it, expanding on it, nurturing it. And so it's really about the development of oneself. And if you look at this from a leadership development perspective, when people tell you that leadership development is akin to personal development, this is what they're saying, that one needs to develop himself or herself as a person, to develop oneself as a leader. So what's special about you? These traits and characteristics, what I'd ask you to do is grab a paper and pencil, and you're going to need that for a couple other exercises as well that will follow this, is what I'd ask you to do is just make a list at this moment between these dichotomies, between these two descriptors. Which one is more like you? Are you more spontaneous or structured? Are you more spontaneous or structured? Would you consider yourself to be more sensitive or analytical? Introverted or extroverted? Tough or gentle? Tenacious or flexible? Confident or humble? Pragmatic or theoretical? So as you look at your list of words, I appreciate that doesn't take the place of a full personality assessment or a workshop. The purpose of doing so was really to get you thinking about what words describe you. Now, those of you who have taken some type of personality assessment will recognize the thrill of learning about what was unique about you and how it reinforced a lot of things that you know already. And this reinforcement tends to come from this notion of a bipolar thing of the choice between two goods. I would encourage you also to be thinking about another element of who you are. Those of you who were in the first workshop webinar may recall this quote from Dylan Thomas. I hold a beast, an angel, and a madman in me, and my inquiry is as to their working, and my problem is their subjugation and victory, downthrow and upheaval, and my effort is their self-expression. Complex quote, but essentially what Dylan Thomas was saying is we all have light sides and we have dark sides. And to understand who we are and to be fully who we are, we also need to understand our dark side. Now, I'm not a psychologist. The however is this, is that I would suggest that on close examination and with an openness and willingness to really explore who we are, we can learn a lot about ourselves, and this includes going to the dark side. I love this image here of an angel and a madman inside me. It really is this idea that we are who we are, and there are parts of us that we may not be proud of, but understanding what those parts are and being able to see how those parts influence our leadership is really helps us take a long step towards this idea of personal awareness. I have a few questions for you. And again, I'd ask you to grab a paper and a pencil, and these are for you privately. You don't need to share these with anybody. I would ask that you just honestly answer these questions. And maybe these questions will help you be thinking about issues that maybe not as productive in your orientation to work and your connection with other people. First and foremost, whose approval do you seek? Whose approval do you seek? Is there somebody in the organization, there's more than one person in the organization, that you're really compelled to find their approval? Have you ever thought about it? Have you thought about how that takes away from you being all that you can be? Have you thought about how that drains your energy in some way? So whose approval do you seek? Second question, who do you blame for most of your problems at work? Who's that person that's just the person that just is like somebody scratching on a blackboard? It's the person that you really put the sins of the organization on. Quite frankly, you wish they'd get fired. You wish they'd just go away. You really put the problems, your problems, on them. Who's that person? And what does that say about you? Thirdly, what do you fear most at work? What do you fear? Losing your job? Being embarrassed? Being wrong? Not being liked? Making a mistake? Being irrelevant? What do you fear most at work? Then as you answer that question, my question to you is this, is what does this do to take away from your impact in the organization, your leadership? How much of your energy, how much of your concentration, how distracted are you by this fear? Those questions are really designed to get you thinking about maybe you need to spend a bit more time and energy looking at the darker sides of who you are. Not to change that, but to understand what they are and then start to understand how these play out in your leadership. Lastly, triggers. So a trigger is something that happens, some kind of an action, some kind of an event that will trigger an emotional response in you. Now, most times when we're talking about triggers, we're talking about an emotional response that is negative. All emotions are neutral to some degree, but we know there are some emotions that really hurt you as a leader, that really get in your way, that really distract you, that really drain your energy. And so when I use the term triggers, I'm mostly referring to triggers, events, actions, experiences, mostly things that other people do or don't do that generate an emotion in you that if left unmanaged, unmastered, will take away from your leadership. So what triggers the following emotions in you? As I go through these, be thinking about this, and maybe if you get an opportunity to jot down a couple of notes as well. Being brutally honest with yourself. These emotions, if you experience that emotion, what triggers it for you? Anger. At work, what makes you angry? What one thing makes you angry? Almost every time it happens, makes you angry. Jealousy. Most of us have it, all to some degree. What makes you jealous? You have a little bit of jealousy when something happens? Who causes it most frequently? What would cause you to be embarrassed at work? What triggers embarrassment for you? What are the things that you almost avoid doing or risking because the fear of embarrassment is so strong? What makes you feel guilty? What triggers guilt for you? There are no set rules on how you can manage those, but by simply being aware of what triggers your emotional responses, you then get to be thinking about and be much more conscious of how can I react to this, and how can I become much more the master of my own ship. Next thing I'd like to talk about in this idea of triggers is what it really means for us as leaders. So for you as a leader, we believe, and our research tells us, there's 10 primarily emotional triggers. So these are the things that we do intentionally or unintentionally that trigger emotions, primarily negative emotions, in other people. Firstly, disrespect. All research tells us that people who are treated with disrespect, it's the number one cause of a negative emotional response. So when you think about this, and as I go through these 10, I would encourage you to select 3. So pick 3 of these that may be opportunities for you to explore within your own repertoire of leadership behaviors that maybe you're doing it inadvertently, maybe you're not putting enough attention in this, and maybe you are triggering negative emotional responses in others that you don't intend to. Disrespect, number 1. Number 2 is unfair criticism. Number 3 is not appreciating others. The 4th is an arrogant or selfish boss. We look at our other bosses, and most of us, it's like somebody scratching on a blackboard when we work for an arrogant, selfish boss. How often do we show up that way to the people around us in our organization? Exclusion, keeping people out. Condescension. Others taking undeserved credit. Being overwhelmed. Disloyalty. And abrasive people. Now, I'm sure as you're looking at that list, those are pretty strong words. That's a pretty strong list. And it's easy for us to say that all 10 of those will trigger something in most of us. My guess is as you went through that, there's 3 or 4 of those that really stood out for you as things, man, when that happens to me, that really does trigger a negative reaction. It really does trigger an emotion that sometimes I have trouble dealing with. That's important information for you to know. It's also important for us as leaders to know that we show up doing these things unintentionally sometimes. People make up their own story about our behaviors. And so I would encourage you to be thinking about your day-to-day activities and what you may or may not be doing to trigger these kind of emotional responses in others. This brings me to one other element I want to share with you, and this is the idea called fundamental attribution error. Pretty fancy words, but what fundamental attribution error is essentially this, is that if somebody, a stranger, you meet a stranger in the elevator, you speak to the stranger and the stranger speaks to you not, completely ignores you, leaves the elevator. You're thinking at that time, what a jerk. I spoke to the person, I greeted them, and they didn't speak to me at all. What a jerk. That person leaves the elevator with a completely different story. They leave the elevator thinking, man, I heard somebody talking to me, but I was distracted. Here's what fundamental attribution error is. Essentially, when we're looking at other people, we often attribute their behavior, their mistakes, their actions, to their personality, to their abilities, even to their motives. So we were attributing the person's bad manners in the elevator to their upbringing, to their lack of care and consideration. They're just that kind of a person. What we do for ourselves, however, is we attribute it to the situation. If I was the person in the elevator, I could just say I was distracted. So what we tend to do is we tend to judge other people by some form of personality, motives, something that's unique to them. Often it's not very good. We do exactly the same thing, and we attribute it to the situation. We say, I was distracted in the elevator. I was thinking about some work. I know I should have said hello back to that person, but it didn't matter because I was distracted by some important elements involving other people. So I would encourage you to consider this, not so much because you need to change this behavior. We tend to always do it, but at least recognize the fact that this often is an area of self-knowledge. So the next time you excuse yourself for bad behavior, the next time people just simply don't get you, I would encourage you to remember that they have a story. Here's a way of looking at it. If you were choosing between these two words, would you like to call yourself nosy or curious? Now, you may see yourself as curious. What if other people think you have been inordinately and maybe even rudely nosy? Are you overly talkative or are you expressive? You might see yourself as being expressive. Other people might think of you as being overly talkative. Are you anal or well-organized? Are you meddlesome or helpful? Are you insensitive or distracted? This is the person on the elevator. So if you look at this list, and if we're looking at this idea of personal awareness, it's not that we have to judge ourselves harshly, but what we need to do is to be able to look at the entire continuum of potential interpretations of our behavior, of who we are. The last element of personal awareness that I did want to share with you is this idea of carrying burdens. I'd like to share with you another Zen Buddhist story. This is called The Monk and the Young Woman. Two monks were traveling together, an older monk and a younger monk. They noticed a young woman at the edge of a stream, afraid to cross the stream. The older monk picked her up, carried her across the stream, and put her down safely on the other side. The younger monk was astonished, but he didn't say anything until the journey was over. The younger monk could no longer contain himself, so he asked the older monk this: "Why did you carry that woman across the stream? You know monks aren't supposed to touch any member of the opposite sex." The older monk replied, "I left her at the edge of the river, but you're still carrying her now. I left her at the edge of the river, but you're still carrying her now." As an executive leadership coach, I work closely with wonderfully talented men and women who are looking to make a major shift in their performance and careers as leaders. Many times, to make that shift, they need to let go of things that are holding them back. What burdens are you carrying? The story of the monk really is a metaphor for holding on to things that no longer serve us well. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to think back in your career and write down, again privately, the names of three people. Three people that you're still carrying. And these are people that probably injured you in some way. They might have been somebody who fired you. They might have been somebody who hurt you in some way. They might have been the person responsible for embarrassing you in the organization. They might have been somebody who you had some type of major interpersonal conflict with. Who are you still carrying? And sometimes this can be years and years out. Now, the reason I share this exercise with you, or ask you to do this exercise, is there's always an emotional price that you pay for carrying that burden. You can tell that you're paying that price because you'll do things like rehearse conversations with that person, artificial conversations with that person, about what you should have told them. If you see them again, what you're going to tell them. You're going to win this time. Think about the nature of the conversation you would have with that person, how many times you rehearse those conversations, and how many times you think about how you would like the world to be different involving that person. And sometimes not that pleasant. That is a burden you're carrying. That is an emotional burden that you're carrying. That is something that probably needs to be left behind before you can move on in some way. It's my hope that as we have gone through these exercises that in some way that you've enhanced your personal awareness. We have a workshop called the Leader Within, and in it, at the end of each module, we encourage our participants to take a real close look at the things they can do and do every day to enhance their impact as a leader. And on the screen right now, we have the 3 that we call the practices of extraordinary leaders in this element of personal awareness. The first one is observe yourself. Get in the habit of observing yourself. We call it getting on the balcony. Get up on the balcony. Get out of yourself in some way and watch yourself. Look at your emotional reaction to situations. Look at how you interact with other people. Look how you're feeling, happy, sad, glad, mad. Secondly, embrace your feelings. They are okay, they are natural, and they are necessary. Be a sponge for feelings. Look at the entire suite of your feelings as a source of leadership power. And lastly, start to look at your unique reactions. You have a unique pattern. We all do. We have unique patterns of feeling, thinking, acting. Feel, think, act. We do it all day long. We feel, we think, we act. We feel, we think, we act. It's very difficult to lift your game as a leader when you do not understand the patterns that cause most of your behavior today. So on a broader scale, how can leaders accelerate their LEQ? Well, first and foremost, it's about becoming more self-aware. And a large purpose of our webinar today was to do that. Secondly, it's about learning to master your emotions in the moment. Not being a slave to your emotions, but be the master of those emotions. Thirdly, practice making deep connections every day. And lastly, simply create the habit of being confident and optimistic. It's my hope that I was able to help you expand your personal awareness, and that was number 1 in this list here. Numbers 2, 3, and 4 will be the subject of our upcoming webinars. I'd like to leave you with one final comment. Leadership is a tough journey. It's tougher yet to change. We talk about this idea of leadership development as if it's a straight, linear, easily learned process. It is not. There are wonderful leaders we can learn from. There's wonderful leadership development programs we can experience. But at its very core, it starts with an attitude for all of us. If we want to become the leader we've never been, we need to do what we've never done before. So I would like to leave this with you. If you're looking at your own leadership in some way, if you're looking at the next chapter of your leadership, number 1, you cannot get there unless at the same time as you learn new practices and behaviors and techniques, you also build that inner muscle, that emotional intelligence as you grow. And secondly, you cannot get there unless you make an absolute commitment to make a fundamental change in what you're going to do and who you're going to be as a leader. I want to thank you for your attention and your time and your participation on in the session today. On the screen, you'll see my coordinates, my email address, and my telephone number. Be delighted to speak to you at any time about leadership, leadership development, leadership emotional intelligence. So please feel free to contact me at any time.